The caregiver asked the sick billionaire, "Sir, why is my mom's picture in your wallet? Have you ever met someone who was supposed to be a stranger, only to realize they were connected to you in ways you never imagined?" Celine George never expected her life to change when she accepted a caregiving job for a wealthy but sick billionaire. Struggling to support her mother, she was simply looking for a paycheck. But fate had other plans. Jones Harrison, a once powerful businessman, had no idea that the young woman taking care of him was the daughter he never knew. And when Celine stumbled upon a faded picture of her mother in his wallet, everything changed. What was the truth behind their past? Why had her mother hidden this from her? And would she ever be able to forgive the father who never even knew she existed? Stay with me until the end, because this story is filled with secrets, heartbreak, and a twist you won't see coming. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, let me say something truly personal. We spend hours creating these stories, hoping they touch lives around the world. One of my biggest goals is to share lessons about love, humility, and second chances. If this story resonates with you, please let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you in the comment. Now, let's begin. Celine George stepped off the packed bus, the late summer heat clinging to her caramel skin like a damp cloth. The city thrummed around her, horns blaring, voices overlapping, the relentless churn of a world that never stopped moving. At 26, she felt the weight of years she hadn't lived, dragged down by bills that multiplied faster than she could count, and a life that seemed to slip through her fingers. Caregiving was her tether, a job she threw her heart into, even when it left her drained and barely scraping by. But today hit different. The agency had called at dawn with an assignment that twisted her insides. A live-in gig at the estate of Jones Harrison, a billionaire whose name carried a shadow, a man who'd once dominated the world but now teetered on its edge. She adjusted the fraying strap of her duffel bag and stared up at the towering wrought iron gates that fenced his property. They stood like sentinels, cold and uninviting, a fitting match for the man she'd been warned about. The agency's voice rang in her ears. "He's a beast, Celine. Dying, bitter, and hates everyone." Good luck. She blew out a breath, hit the intercom, and waited as a rough voice crackled through. "Who's there?" "Celine George," she said, keeping her tone firm despite the nerves clawing at her ribs. "From the nurse agency." A beat of silence stretched out, then the gates creaked open, revealing an estate that looked more like a monument than a house, marble columns, clipped lawns, and a fountain that trickled faintly in the distance. She walked the curving path, her sneakers scraping against the stone, and before she could knock, the front door swung wide. A woman in a starched uniform, probably the housekeeper, gave her a quick once-over. "You're the new one," the woman said, her voice flat as a board. "He's upstairs. Don't expect him to play nice." Celine nodded, clutching her bag tighter as she trailed the woman through a vast foyer lined with stern portraits, their gazes prickling her skin. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of wax and a faint medicinal bite. At the top of a wide staircase, the housekeeper pointed to a door down the hall. "That's his room. He's up. Watch your step. He's got a mouth that'll cut you down." "Appreciate it," Celine muttered, though the woman was already retreating. She straightened her spine and approached the door, knocking lightly. "Come in or get out," a gruff voice snapped from the other side, sharp enough to rattle the frame. She stepped into a room steeped in shadow, the air thick with antiseptic and the musk of wealth. Jones Harrison sat propped up in a massive bed, his thin frame lost among pillows, his silver hair wild and uncombed. His eyes, blue and fierce as a storm, pinned her in place, and she felt their heat like a brand. Once a king of commerce, a man who'd carved an empire with grit and a cold streak, He was now a wraith. Pale, fragile, tied to an oxygen tank that hissed beside him. But those eyes hadn't dimmed. They burned with a fire that dared her to flinch. "You're late," he growled, though she knew she wasn't. "Name?" "Celine George," she said, dropping her bag and meeting his stare head-on. "I'm here to look after you." He barked a laugh that turned into a cough, harsh and jagged. "Look after me? I don't need a babysitter. I need people to stop hovering like I'm already cold." "I'm not hovering," she shot back, her voice carrying a bite she hadn't planned. "I'm here because it's my job and I'm good at it. So how about we skip the fight and get on with it?" Jones cocked an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by her nerve. The room went still, the only sound the steady wheeze of his oxygen, until he waved a trembling hand. "Fine. Mess with the machines. Hand me the pills, whatever. Just don't yap too much." Celine moved to his side, her hands steady as she checked the oxygen flow and adjusted the IV drip. She could feel him watching her, sizing her up, but she kept her focus tight on the work. Cranky patients were old hat. What wasn't was the strange pull of this place, this man. Why did someone with all this, money, power, a kingdom, seem so empty, so cut off? "You're not like the others," he said abruptly, his voice gravelly and low. "They scamper around, afraid to breathe wrong. You've got guts." She glanced at him, caught off guard. "Comes with the territory," she said dryly. "You deal with enough grumps. You learn to push back." He grunted, a sound that might have been a smirk. "What's your deal, then? Why's a girl like you stuck playing nurse?" Celine stiffened, but kept her tone level. "It's not stuck. It's survival. Keeps the lights on and the roof over my head. Plus, I'm not half bad at it." His eyes flickered, a shadow passing through them she couldn't place. "Survival," he echoed, almost to himself. "Funny how that works. You got family dragging you down?" She hesitated, her chest tightening. "Something like that," she said, sidestepping. "What about you? No one around to fuss over you but strangers?" Jones's lips twitched, a bitter twist. "Strangers are better. Family just wants a piece of what's left. I ran 'em off years ago." "Sounds lonely," she said before she could stop herself. He shot her a look, sharp and cutting. "Don't pity me, girl. I built this life, every brick of it. Lonely's a small price to pay." Celine shrugged, adjusting the IV line. "If you say so. Still hard to believe a guy like you doesn't have someone out there who gives a damn." "Maybe there was," he said, his voice dropping low, rough with something she couldn't pin down. "Long time ago. Didn't end well." Her pulse ticked up. "What happened?" He turned his head toward the window, where the last of the day's light filtered through heavy curtains, striping the floor in gold and gray. "Life happened. I chased what mattered. Money, power, the next deal. People don't stick around when you're climbing that high." "You let them go," she said, not a question. He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window like it held something he'd lost. "Sometimes you don't get a choice," he said finally, his tone clipped. "Sometimes they walk away first." Celine studied him, the lines etched deep in his face, the way his hands flexed against the sheets. There was more here, something he wasn't saying, a piece of his past that hung in the air like smoke. "Sounds like a story," she said, pulling a chair closer and sitting. "You gonna tell it?" He looked back at her, his gaze hard but curious. "You're nosy, you know that? Most people just nod and move on." "I'm not most people," she replied, leaning forward. "And you brought it up. So what's the deal? Who walked away?" Jones let out a slow, rasping breath, his eyes searching hers. "You want the dirt," he said, his voice low. "Stick around, girl. I've got plenty to tell, but it ain't all sunshine." "I can handle it," she said, her heart picking up speed. "Try me." He leaned back, the oxygen tank hissing louder in the quiet. All right. Back when I was still scrappy, before the suits and the penthouses, I had someone keeping me in line. Worked for me, kept my head straight. Best damn thing I had going. But I got greedy, started climbing, and they didn't fit the picture anymore. So they left. Or I made them leave. Depends who's telling it. Celine's mind raced. They, she pressed. Who? He smirked, faint and bitter. Doesn't matter now. Point is, you make choices and they stick. You live with them, or you don't. That's not an answer, she said, her voice firm. You're dodging. His eyes narrowed, a spark flaring. You're digging in places you don't belong, girl. Keep it up, and you'll stir up more than you're ready for. Good thing I don't scare easy, she shot back, holding his gaze. If there's more, I'm not walking away till I hear it. Jones stared at her, long and steady, then let out a rough chuckle. You've got fire, I'll give you that. Fine, stay, but don't cry to me when the truth bites. The room went quiet, the weight of his words settling heavy between them. Celine's pulse thrummed, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this person he'd lost? Why did it still cut him so deep? This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a door cracking open, hinting at something bigger, something tied to the man in front of her in ways she couldn't yet see. As the light faded outside, draping the room in a muted glow, one thing crystallized. She was hooked now, and whatever lay behind his guarded words, she'd dig until she found it, no matter what it cost. Celine sat back in the chair, her eyes locked on Jones Harrison, the air between them thick with unspoken challenges. His last words, "Don't cry to me when the truth bites," hung heavy, daring her to push further. She could feel the edges of something jagged in his story, a wound he wouldn't show, and it lit a fire in her she couldn't shake. This wasn't just about surviving the job anymore. It was about cracking open the shell of this man who seemed to carry more ghosts than the estate itself. You talk a big game, she said, her voice steady despite the thud of her pulse. All this about choices and living with them. But you're still here, alone, barking at anyone who gets close. What's that say about you? Jones's eyes flashed, a storm brewing behind them. It says I don't need lectures from a kid who doesn't know the half of it, he snapped, his voice rough as gravel. You think you've got me figured out? You don't know a damn thing. Then enlighten me, she shot back, leaning forward. You've got all these walls up, literal and otherwise. What's the point? You're dying, Jones. What's left to protect? He flinched at that, just a flicker, but she caught it. His hand tightened on the sheet, knuckles whitening. Watch your mouth, he said, low and dangerous. You're here to fix tubes, not play shrink. Push too far, and you'll be out that door faster than you can blink. Celine didn't budge. Fire me then. Go ahead. But I'm not here to tiptoe around you like everyone else. You want me gone. Say it. For a moment he just stared, his breathing shallow and uneven, the oxygen tank hissing in the quiet. Then he let out a dry, bitter laugh. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Most would have bolted by now. Most don't need this gig as bad as I do, she said, her tone softening but still firm. I'm not here for fun. I'm here because it's all I've got. Something shifted in his gaze. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition he didn't voice. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Desperation's a hell of a motivator, he muttered. All right, girl, you've got your foot in the door. Don't make me regret it. She nodded, standing to adjust the pillow behind him, her hands brushing the fabric as she worked. Deal. But don't think I'm done asking questions. Wouldn't dream of it, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips before it faded. Now get out. I'm tired of your face already. Celine grabbed her bag and headed for the door, pausing to glance back. Jones was watching her, his expression unreadable, and for a split second she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that made her skin prickle. She shook it off and stepped into the hall, the weight of their clash lingering like static in the air. Whatever he was hiding, she'd get to it. She always did. The next morning, Celine stood at the foot of the estate's long driveway, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, staring up at the massive structure that loomed ahead. She'd barely slept, the grandeur of the place sinking in overnight, marble and glass stretching into the sky, windows glinting like eyes, lawns so perfect they looked painted. It was overwhelming, a world so far from her crumbling apartment and late-night shifts that it felt like stepping into someone else's life. But she wasn't here to gawk, she was here to work, and after yesterday's sparring match with Jones, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The housekeeper, whose name she'd learned was Ruth, met her at the door again, her face as welcoming as a brick wall. "He's in a mood," Ruth said, handing her a keycard. "Worse than usual. Don't say I didn't warn you." "Got it," Celine replied, pocketing the card and heading up the stairs she'd climbed the day before. The hall felt longer this time, the portraits more judgmental, and when she reached Jones's door, she didn't bother knocking, just pushed it open and stepped inside. He was awake, sitting up in bed, a tray of untouched breakfast shoved to the side. His eyes snapped to her, sharp and cold. "You again," he growled. "Thought you'd have the sense to quit after yesterday." "Morning to you too," she said, setting her bag down and crossing her arms. "I don't scare off that easy." "Good for you," he sneered, waving a hand dismissively. "Just do your job and spare me the heroics. I don't need pity from some broke kid playing nurse." Celine's jaw tightened, but she kept her cool. "I don't offer pity," she said, stepping closer. "Just care. If that's too much for you, fire me. Otherwise, I'm staying." He stared at her, his expression a mix of irritation and something else, something that flickered and vanished before she could name it. "You're a stubborn one," he muttered, his voice rough but quieter now. "Fine. Check the damn machines. But don't expect me to thank you." She moved to his side, her hands steady as she adjusted the oxygen tank and checked his pulse. The room was silent except for the steady hiss of the equipment, but she could feel the tension rolling off him, thick and heavy. He watched her every move, his eyes narrowed, and she caught the way his brow furrowed slightly, like he was trying to place her. "What?" she asked, glancing up. "You're staring." "Your voice," he said, almost to himself, then shook his head. "Nothing. Forget it." "No. What about my voice?" she pressed, her curiosity spiking. "You've got a problem with it?" He scowled, brushing her off. "I said forget it. Sounds familiar, that's all. Probably just tired of hearing you already." Celine paused, her hand hovering over the IV line. Familiar? It was a throwaway comment, but it landed like a stone in her gut. She filed it away, her mind turning. "Whatever you say," she replied, keeping her tone light despite the questions piling up. "Let's just get through the day without you throwing me out, all right?" "Don't tempt me," he shot back, but there was less venom in it this time. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and for a moment she thought he'd dismissed her entirely. Then he spoke again, his voice low. "You're not what I expected." She raised an eyebrow, adjusting the drip. "What did you expect?" "Someone weaker," he said bluntly. "Most crack under this place. You're still standing." "Give it time," she said dryly, stepping back. "I'm tougher than I look." He opened one eye, peering at her. "We'll see about that." The words hung there, a challenge wrapped in something heavier, something that made her wonder what he saw when he looked at her, what memory her voice had brushed against. She didn't push it, not yet, but the seed was planted. Jones Harrison was a puzzle, and every snapped word, every guarded glance, was a piece she'd collect. As she gathered her things to leave the room, his eyes followed her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back, something that tied them together in ways neither of them could yet name. Celine stepped out of Jones's room, the echo of his last words. "We'll see about that," lingering like a dare. The hallway stretched before her, its polished floors and looming portraits swallowing the morning light. She couldn't shake the way he'd paused over her voice, that flicker of recognition he'd brushed off. It gnawed at her, a loose thread in a man who seemed stitched together with secrets. But she had a job to do, and day one was already a battlefield. She'd survive it before digging deeper. Back in the room later that afternoon, Jones was no warmer. She brought him a glass of water, and he swatted at it, nearly knocking it from her hand. "I told you I don't need coddling," he snapped, his voice a rasp that scraped the air. "You're here to keep me breathing, not play maid." Celine set the glass down hard enough to make it clink against the table. "And I told you, I'm not here to kiss your boots," she fired back. "You want to die dehydrated? Be my guest. I'm just doing what they pay me for." He glared at her, his blue eyes cutting like glass, but she didn't flinch. "You've got a mouth on you," he said finally, leaning back. "Most would have cried and run by now." "Most don't have bills that bite like mine," she replied, checking his oxygen levels with a practiced hand. "You're stuck with me, so deal with it." He grunted, a sound that might have been disdain or amusement, and turned his head away. But she caught it again, that slight pause, the way his brow creased when she spoke, like her voice was a key turning a lock he didn't want opened. "Quit staring," she said, not looking up. "What's with you today?" "Nothing," he muttered, too quick. "Just get on with it." She let it drop, but the air felt heavier now, charged with something neither of them would name. As she adjusted the IV, he shifted, his voice low. "You're too damn stubborn for your own good." "Keeps me alive," she said, meeting his gaze. "Maybe you should try it sometime." He didn't respond, just closed his eyes, but the tension between them stretched tight, a wire ready to snap. She finished her rounds and left, the weight of his stare following her out. Whatever he'd heard in her voice, it wasn't nothing, and she'd find out why. A few days later, Celine was settling into the rhythm of the estate, though it fought her every step. The place was a maze, hallways that twisted, rooms that stayed dark, a quiet that pressed against her ears. She'd started noticing things, small at first, but they piled up like stones in her pocket. There was a door off the main hall, heavy oak with a brass lock that didn't match the others, always shut tight. She'd passed it twice, her fingers itching to try the handle, but Ruth's shadow was never far behind. That morning, she lingered near it, wiping down a table that didn't need cleaning. The door stared back at her, silent and stubborn, and she muttered under her breath, "What's so special about you?" "Leave it," came a sharp voice. Ruth stood at the end of the hall, her arms crossed, her face carved from stone. "You shouldn't ask too many questions here." Celine turned, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Why not? It's just a door." "It's his study," Ruth said, stepping closer, her voice dropping. "Locked for a reason. You're here to tend him, not poke around. Trust me. Keep your nose where it belongs." "Or what?" Celine challenged, her pulse ticking up. "What's he hiding in there?" Ruth's eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer, just turned and walked off, her footsteps echoing. Celine stared at the door, her mind racing. A locked study, a cryptic warning. This place was a puzzle, and Jones was the center of it. She filed it away, another thread to pull later. That afternoon, everything shifted. She was in Jones's room, checking his chart, when he started coughing, hard, jagged hacks that shook his frail frame. She glanced up, expecting him to wave her off, but his face was gray, his lips tinged blue. "Jones," she said, dropping the chart. No answer, just a wheeze that didn't stop. "Hold on," she barked, moving fast. She cranked the oxygen flow, grabbed the emergency kit from her bag, and jabbed a dose of bronchodilator into his IV. His chest heaved, fighting for air, and she pressed her hands to his shoulders, steadying him. Breathe with me, slow, in and out. You're not checking out on my watch. For a terrifying minute, it hung in the balance. His gasps, the hiss of the tank, her own heart hammering. Then his breathing eased, color creeping back into his face. He slumped against the pillows, exhausted, and she stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. "You good?" she asked, voice tight. He nodded, barely, his eyes half open. "Didn't think you had that in you," he rasped, each word a struggle. "Surprise," she said, dryly, checking his vitals again. "You're welcome." He didn't thank her, didn't even look at her, but she caught the shift. His hand, still trembling, brushed the sheet like he wanted to say something, then stopped. She busied herself with the equipment, giving him space, but the air had changed. She'd saved him, and he knew it. Later, as she gathered her things, he spoke, his voice low. "You're not useless." She paused, glancing back. "High praise from you." "Don't get cocky," he muttered, but there was no bite in it. His eyes flicked to her, then away, and she saw it again. That crease in his brow, like her voice was tugging at something buried. "Get out. I need sleep." Celine nodded, stepping into the hall, but her mind wouldn't settle. The locked study, Ruth's warning, Jones's near collapse, it all swirled together, a storm building inside her. He respected her now, even if he wouldn't admit it, and that gave her leverage. Whatever he was holding back, about her voice, about this house, she'd get to it. As she passed the study door again, its silence mocked her, promising answers she couldn't yet reach. But she would. One way or another, she'd break through. Celine moved through Jones's room with a damp cloth, wiping down surfaces that didn't need it, her mind still spinning from the week's chaos. The locked study haunted her, its heavy door a taunt she couldn't ignore. And Ruth's warning rang in her ears like a bell she couldn't unring. She'd caught the housekeeper watching her twice since, eyes sharp and unyielding, but Celine wasn't backing off. Then there was Jones, gruff, brittle, but alive because of her. That emergency had shifted something. He didn't snap as hard now, though his respect came wrapped in silence. She could feel it, though, in the way he let her work without a fight. She paused by his bedside table, running the cloth over its edge when she heard it, a faint groan from the bed. Jones shifted, his breathing uneven, and she stepped closer. "You all right?" she asked, keeping her tone steady. "Fine," he muttered, waving her off. "Just old. Stop hovering." "Not hovering," she said, stepping back. "Just making sure you don't keel over again." He grunted, a rough sound, and closed his eyes. She turned back to the table, her cloth brushing something, a leather wallet worn at the edges, half hidden under a stack of papers. It slid to the floor with a soft thud, spilling open. She bent to pick it up, her fingers brushing a faded photo peeking out. Her breath caught. The face staring back was unmistakable, warm brown eyes, a smile she'd know anywhere. Margaret, her mother. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She glanced at Jones, still resting, eyes shut, and pulled the photo free, her hands trembling. It was old, the edges creased, but it was her. Margaret George, younger, vibrant, caught in a moment Celine didn't recognize. Why did he have this? Did he know her mother? Her mind raced, questions piling up like storm clouds. "Put that down," Jones's voice cut through, low and sharp. She flinched, looking up to find his eyes open, fixed on her with a cold fury. Celine clutched the photo, her voice tight. "Why do you have this? This is my mom, Margaret George. Did you know her?" He sat up slowly, his face a mask of stone. "Leave my past alone," he said, each word deliberate, heavy. "Put it back and get out." "No," she shot back, stepping closer, the photo shaking in her hand. You don't get to dodge this. Why's her picture in your wallet? What aren't you telling me? Jones's jaw tightened, his hands fisting the sheets. I said leave it, he growled, his voice rising. You've got no business digging in my life. She's my mother, Celine snapped, her voice cracking with emotion. If you knew her, I've got every right to know how. Start talking. He stared at her, his eyes blazing, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until he turned his head away, his breathing ragged. Get out, he rasped. Now. Celine stood her ground, her chest heaving. I'm not dropping this, she said, her voice low but firm. You've got answers, and I'll get them. One way or another. She set the photo on the table, not back in the wallet, and grabbed her bag, storming out. Her mind was a whirlwind, shock, anger, 1,000 what-ifs. Why Margaret? What tied her mother to this bitter, broken man? She needed air, space to think, but the questions wouldn't let her rest. What would you do if you found proof that a stranger might not be a stranger after all? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to hear. Celine stormed down the hall. The image of her mother's photograph burned into her mind, her pulse a drumbeat she couldn't quiet. Jones's refusal, leave my past alone, echoed like a wall she'd have to claw through. She ducked into a small guest room she'd claimed as her own, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone, scrolling to her mom's number. Margaret had to know something, anything, to explain this. The line rang twice before her mother's voice came through, frail but warm. Celine? You okay, honey? Mom, Celine said, pacing the room, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know a man named Jones Harrison? Billionaire, big estate, mean as hell? A pause stretched too long. Jones, Harrison. Margaret's tone wavered like she was testing the name. No, doesn't ring a bell. Why? Celine stopped, gripping the phone tighter. I found a picture of you in his wallet, Mom. An old one. He won't talk, but he's got it for a reason. What's going on? Another silence, heavier this time. Oh, honey, Margaret said, her voice softening. People collect all sorts of things. Maybe it's someone who looks like me. Don't worry yourself over it. Don't worry? Celine's voice rose, sharp with frustration. You're dodging, Mom. I know you. What aren't you saying? Celine, please, Margaret cut in, firmer now. I'm tired, and this doesn't make sense to me. Let it be. The call ended with a click, leaving Celine staring at the screen, her gut twisting. Margaret was lying, or hiding something. That hesitation, the quick brush off. It wasn't nothing. She tossed the phone onto the bed, her mind racing. Jones wouldn't talk, her mom wouldn't either, but the answers were here, in this house. She'd find them herself. That night she couldn't sleep, the mansion's quiet pressing against her like a weight. She slipped into the hall, her sneakers silent on the polished floor, drawn back to that locked study. Ruth's warning, you shouldn't ask too many questions here, only fueled her now. She tested the handle again, still locked, but noticed a faint seam in the wood panel beside it, barely visible in the dim light. Her fingers traced it, pressing until a soft click sounded. A hidden compartment? Not quite, just a loose panel, but it sparked an idea. There were secrets here, and she'd tear this place apart to find them. The next day, Jones was stable but distant, barely acknowledging her as she checked his vitals. She kept her questions caged, watching him instead. His guarded glances, the way his hands flexed when she spoke. After he drifted off, she slipped back to the study, this time with a hairpin from her bag. The lock was old, stubborn, but she'd picked worse growing up. It gave with a quiet snap, and she pushed the door open, heart pounding. Inside, the room smelled of dust and leather, shelves of books, a desk piled with papers, and a safe tucked into the wall, its dial gleaming faintly. She froze, then moved to the desk, flipping through a stack of files until her hands landed on a journal, its cover worn but intact. She opened it, scanning the scrawled entries, and her breath stopped. Margaret leaped off the page, her mother's name over and over. Margaret laughed today, brighter than the sun. Margaret left this morning, said I'd regret it. Margaret's gone, and I'm a fool. Her knees buckled. This wasn't a coincidence. Jones knew her mother, intimately, painfully, and he'd kept it buried. She clutched the journal, her mind a storm of shock and fury. The safe loomed behind her. What else was he hiding? She couldn't stop now. Tonight, when the house slept, she'd search every inch of this place. Whatever tied Jones to Margaret, whatever he wouldn't say, she'd drag it into the light. Celine waited until the mansion fell silent, the clock ticking past midnight, its hands glowing faintly in the dark. Her nerves buzzed as she slipped from her room, the journal's weight a fire in her chest. Margaret's name in Jones's jagged scrawl, proof he'd known her mother, proof he'd cared, drove her back to the study. The hairpin worked faster this time, the lock giving with a soft click that echoed in the stillness. She pushed the door open, her breath shallow, and stepped inside, the air thick with dust and secrets. She didn't waste time. The safe drew her first, its cold steel unyielding under her fingers, but she didn't have the tools or the code. She turned to the desk instead, rifling through drawers, her hands trembling with urgency. Papers, receipts, nothing, until her fingers brushed a hidden catch beneath the desktop. A panel slid open, revealing a stack of envelopes, yellowed and tied with twine. Her heart slammed as she pulled them free, the top one catching her eye. To Margaret. She tore it open, scanning the faded ink. Margaret, I was a fool to let you walk away. I built this empire, but it's empty without you. Another. Margaret, I can't send this. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need it. Her chest tightened, each word a punch. Jones had loved her mother, deeply, desperately, but something had ripped them apart. She flipped through more, dates spanning years, all unsent, all raw with regret. Why didn't he mail them? What broke them? Her mind reeled, piecing it together. Margaret's evasion on the phone, Jones's guarded silences. There was a story here, a wound that hadn't healed, and she was holding its jagged edges. She reached for the last letter, her hands shaking, when a floorboard creaked behind her. "What the hell are you doing?" Jones's voice sliced through the dark, low and furious. Celine spun, the letters spilling to the floor, her pulse a roar in her ears. He stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane, his face a storm of rage and something deeper. Pain, maybe, or fear. His eyes locked on the envelopes, then her, and the air turned to ice. "Answer me," he growled, stepping closer, his cane thudding against the wood. "You've got no right?" "No right?" she cut in, her voice trembling but fierce, holding up a letter. "This is my mom, Jones. You loved her. Wrote her all this, and never sent a damn thing. Why? What happened?" His face went slack, the anger draining into something hollow. "Put those down," he said, his voice cracking. "You don't know what you're messing with." "Then tell me," she shouted, stepping toward him, the letters clutched tight. "She's my mother, and you're hiding half her life from me. What tore you apart?" Jones stared at her, his breathing ragged, the cane trembling in his grip. For a moment she thought he'd collapse. Then his eyes hardened, a wall slamming back up. "Get out," he rasped. "You've gone too far." Celine didn't move, her heart pounding. The letters a lifeline she wouldn't drop. She'd found the truth, or part of it, and it hung between them, sharp and unfinished. Jones's glare burned, but she held it, knowing this was just the edge of something bigger, something that could break them both. Celine stood frozen in the study, the letters from Jones to her mother, Margaret, clutched in her hands, their unsent pleas a weight she couldn't shake. Jones loomed in the doorway, his cane trembling, his face a battlefield of fury and something softer, something broken. The air crackled between them, his demand, "Get out," still ringing, but she wouldn't budge. Not now, not with this. "You don't get to shut me down," she said, her voice shaking with rage and need. "These are about my mom, Margaret. You loved her and you let her go. Why? What happened?" Jones's eyes flickered, a storm brewing behind them, and for a moment she thought he'd lash out. Instead, he sagged against the doorframe, his breath ragged. "You want the truth?" he rasped, his voice barely holding. "Fine. You've ripped the lid off, might as well see the mess." He shuffled forward, collapsing into a chair by the desk, the cane clattering to the floor. Celine didn't move, her heart pounding as he stared at the scattered letters, then up at her. "I loved her," he said, the words rough like they'd been torn out. "Margaret. She was everything. Worked for me back when I was still scrapping for every dime. She kept me human. Then she got pregnant." Celine's breath stopped, the room tilting. "Pregnant?" she whispered, the word a knife. Jones nodded, his gaze distant. "My family found out. Vipers, all of them. Hungry for wealth, power, nothing else. They saw her as a threat. Poor girl, no name, carrying my kid. They forced me to choose, her or the empire I was building. I was weak, Celine. I picked the money. Told her to leave, thought I'd find her later, fix it. But she vanished. I searched, years, every lead. But she was gone. Never knew if the child lived. The letter slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor as his words sank in, sharp and cold. Pregnant. Her mother. Her. She did the math, her mind screaming. 26 years ago, her age. You're saying... Her voice broke, fury rising like a tide. "You abandoned her. You abandoned me." Jones's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "You," he croaked, the realization hitting him like a blow. "You're... hers. Mine. Don't you dare," she shouted, stepping back, tears burning her eyes. "You don't get to claim me now. She raised me alone, broke her back, cried herself to sleep, while you sat in your damn mansion. You didn't look hard enough, Jones. You gave up." "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking, hands shaking as he reached for the cane, fumbling. "I swear, I didn't know you existed. If I had—" "Stop it," she cut in, her chest heaving. "You left her pregnant and alone because your family didn't like her. And now you're what? Sorry? That's not enough." He stared at her, his face crumpling, the weight of decades crashing down. "It's not," he admitted, barely audible. "I've lived with it every day, seeing you. It's her all over again. I failed her, Celine. I failed you." She turned away, wiping her face, the room spinning with anger and grief. Her whole life, her mother's silence, the struggles, the gaps, clicked into place. And it hurt worse than she'd imagined. Jones's confession hung there, raw and incomplete, a wound she didn't know how to close. If you were in Celine's shoes, would you forgive Jones? Or would you walk away? Hit the comments and let me know what you'd do. Celine stood trembling in the study, Jones's confession. "I failed you," cutting deeper than she could bear. The scattered letters at her feet, the weight of his admission that he'd loved Margaret, left her pregnant and never known Celine was his, twisted her insides into knots. Her whole life had been a shadow of this man's cowardice, and now he sat there, broken and pleading, expecting what? Forgiveness? She couldn't breathe through the fury. "You failed me?" she spat, her voice raw, tears streaking her face. "You don't get to say that like it fixes anything. Mom worked herself sick, alone, because you picked your precious empire over us. I grew up with nothing, Jones. Nothing. He flinched, his hands gripping the chair, his face pale and drawn. "I know," he rasped, his voice barely holding. "I searched for her for years, thinking I could make it right, but she was gone and I let myself believe the kid didn't make it. Seeing you now, it's tearing me apart." "Good," she snapped, turning away, her chest tight with grief and rage. "You deserve it. You don't get to play dad after 26 years of silence." Jones's breathing hitched, a rough sound, and he slumped forward, clutching his chest. "I'm not asking you to call me that," he said, weaker now. I needed you to know, before it's too late." She froze, glancing back, his words sinking in. Too late. His frailty hit her then, the oxygen tank, the trembling hands, and a cold thread of fear cut through her anger. She wiped her eyes, storming out without another word, the study door banging shut behind her. Her mind was a war zone, hate clashing with questions, his regret clashing with her pain. She didn't owe him anything, but walking away didn't feel right either. If you were in Celine's shoes, would you forgive Jones? Or would you walk away? Hit the comments and let me know what you'd do. Days later, Jones's health crumbled. She found him that morning, gray and sweating, his breaths shallow gasps that barely moved his chest. "Jones!" she shouted, dropping her bag and rushing to his side. She cranked the oxygen, checked his pulse, weak, erratic, and grabbed the emergency kit, her hands moving on instinct. "Stay with me," she muttered, jabbing a dose of meds into his IV. "You don't get to die on me yet." His eyes fluttered open, glassy but alive, and she steadied him until his breathing leveled. She stepped back, her heart pounding, staring at the man who'd just confessed he was her father, a man she hated, a man she'd saved again. Her stomach churned. Why was she still here? She could leave, should leave, let him face the end alone like he'd left her and Margaret. But as she watched him, frail and fading, something rooted her feet. She couldn't let him die like this, not with so much still unsaid. "You're still here," he croaked, his voice a thread, surprise flickering in his gaze. "Don't flatter yourself," she said, her tone sharp but brittle. "I'm not doing this for you, I can't walk away from someone dying. Even you." He didn't respond, just closed his eyes, and she turned away, wrestling with the storm inside her. Anger screamed at her to go, pack her bag, leave this cursed house. But a quieter voice, one she didn't want to hear, whispered that abandoning him now would haunt her forever. She stayed, moving through her duties like a ghost, her mind a tangle of resentment and duty. That afternoon, the front door slammed open, jolting her from her thoughts. A man strode in, tall, slick, dressed in a suit that screamed money. Ruth trailed him, her face tight. "Celine," she said, voice low. "This is Victor." Jones's nephew. Victor's eyes swept the foyer, cold and calculating, landing on Celine. "So you're the help," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Where's my uncle? I hear he's on his last legs. Time to sort out the estate." Celine bristled, stepping forward. "He's alive, and I'm keeping him that way. What do you want?" Victor smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. "What's mine? Jones has no kids, no heirs. His wealth's up for grabs. I'm here to make sure it stays in the family." Her blood ran cold, Jones's confession flashing back. "He didn't know I existed." Victor didn't either. She folded her arms, her voice steel. "He's not dead yet. You'll have to wait." "Not long, by the look of him," Victor shot back, brushing past her toward the stairs. "Stay out of my way, girl. This doesn't concern you." Celine watched him go, her fists clenched, the air thick with new tension. Jones was dying, a vulture was circling, and she was caught in the middle, tied to a man she couldn't forgive, fighting a battle she didn't ask for. Time was slipping away, and every choice she made now would echo louder than she could stand. Celine stood in the hallway, Victor's smug threat, Stay out of my way," still ringing in her ears as he disappeared upstairs. Her hands shook with a mix of fury and exhaustion, Jones's frail form flashing in her mind. His health was a thread about to snap, and now this slick nephew circling like a shark, ready to carve up an empire he didn't earn. She stormed back to Jones's room, her resolve hardening. She'd kept him alive this long. She wouldn't let him go down under Victor's shadow. Inside, Jones was awake, propped up, his breathing a shallow rasp. He glanced at her, then away. "Heard the commotion," he muttered. "Victor's here, isn't he?" "Yeah," she said, checking his oxygen, her voice tight. "Says he's taking over, thinks you're done." Jones's lips twitched, a faint, bitter smirk. "He's been waiting years for me to croak. Greedy bastard. Family never changes." She paused, her hands stilling. "Then do something about it. You've got time, barely. Don't let him win." He met her gaze, something flickering there. Regret, maybe resolve. "Time," he echoed, his voice fading. "Not much left, is it?" Celine didn't answer, just adjusted his pillows, her chest tight. She hated him still, hated the years he'd stolen, but watching him fade, fighting Victor alone, felt wrong. She stayed, tending him through the night as his breaths grew weaker, her anger wrestling with a pull she couldn't name. The next morning a notary arrived, rushed, papers in hand. Jones had summoned him, his voice barely a whisper but firm. Celine stood by, arms crossed, as he dictated changes to his will. "Everything, estate, assets, all of it, goes to Celine George," he said, his eyes locked on her. "My daughter." Her breath caught, the word hitting like a stone. The notary scribbled, Victor's distant pacing audible downstairs, oblivious. Jones signed, his hand trembling, then sank back, exhausted. Celine stared at him, her throat burning. "Why?" she asked, voice low. He looked at her, his face etched with decades of loss. "I lost decades," he said, his voice breaking. "Couldn't find you, couldn't fix it. I hope I can give you something now. An apology, a legacy. I'm sorry, Celine, for all of it." She turned away, tears pricking her eyes, his words a weight she didn't know how to carry. Forgiveness wasn't there. Not yet, but the rawness in his voice cracked something inside her. She left the room, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "Mom," she said when Margaret answered, "you need to come here, now." Hours later, Margaret arrived, frail but steady, her eyes widening as Celine led her to Jones's bedside. He looked up, his breath catching. "Margaret," he whispered, tears welling, "you're still you." She froze, then stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Jones, I never thought I'd see you again." Celine watched, her chest tight, as they stared at each other, years of pain and love unspoken, spilling into the silence. Margaret reached for his hand, her fingers brushing his, and he gripped them weakly. "I didn't know about her," he said, nodding at Celine. "I'd have fought harder if I did." Margaret's eyes softened, a tear slipping free. "I hid her. Thought it was better that way." Celine stepped forward, her voice firm but cracking. "I don't need your money, Jones. I never did. I just wanted the truth. About you, about us." He nodded, his grip tightening on Margaret's hand. "You've got it now," he said, his voice fading. "And more, if you'll take it." She looked at him, her father dying, flawed, and at her mother, the bridge between them. The anger didn't vanish, but it softened, edged with something like peace. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady. "That's all I can promise." Jones smiled faintly, his eyes closing, and Margaret squeezed his hand, a quiet sob breaking free. Celine stood between them, the past and present colliding, and for the first time she felt the weight lift, just enough to breathe. Closure wasn't clean, but it was theirs. Celine lingered by Jones's bedside, the quiet hum of the oxygen tank filling the room as Margaret sat beside him, their hands still clasped. His apology, "I hope I can give you something now," echoed in her mind, softening the edges of her anger but not erasing it. She watched her mother's tear-streaked face, the years of silence between them finally breaking, and felt a fragile peace settle in. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a start. Jones's breathing slowed, his grip on Margaret's hand loosening, and Celine knew the end was close. "I should have fought," he murmured, his voice a faint thread, eyes drifting to Celine. "For you both." Margaret squeezed his hand, her voice soft. "We're here now. That's enough." Celine nodded, her throat tight, and stepped out to give them a moment, the weight of their reunion pressing against her chest. When she returned, Jones was weaker, but his eyes held a clarity she hadn't seen before. He reached for her hand, his touch cold but firm. "Take it," he whispered. "The truth, the rest. Make it yours." She didn't pull away, letting his words sink in as the room grew still, the fight slipping from him with every breath. Days later, Jones slipped away, peaceful at last. Celine found him that morning, his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips, clutching a photo she hadn't seen before. Margaret, young and radiant, holding a toddler Celine, her caramel skin glowing in the sunlight. Her breath hitched, tears spilling as she traced the image. He'd kept them close, even at the end. The notary returned, papers in hand, confirming what Jones had dictated. Everything was hers, the estate, the wealth, a legacy she hadn't asked for. But it was more than money. It was the missing pieces of her past, the answers she'd chased through this house. Standing in the study, surrounded by his letters and the photo, she felt the weight shift. Not just loss, but possibility. Weeks passed and Celine made a choice. She sat with lawyers, her voice steady as she outlined her plan. "I'm starting a foundation," she said, her eyes firm. "Care for single mothers, health care, support, everything my mom needed when she was alone. That's what this money's for." The first check cleared, and she stood outside a small office she'd rented, a sign going up. Margaret's Care Foundation. Her mother beside her, frail but proud, squeezed her arm. "You're doing good, honey," Margaret said, her voice thick. "He'd be proud, too." Celine looked at the sign, then at the photo she now carried, Jones, Margaret, and her, a family she'd never known. "Maybe forgiveness doesn't erase the past," she said, half to herself, "but it builds a future." The days ahead were busy, hiring staff, reaching out to families. But that night she sat alone, the photo in her hands, and felt the ache ease. Jones was gone, but he'd left her something real, not just wealth, but a chance to heal, to give what he couldn't. She smiled faintly, the future stretching out, hers to shape. What did this story teach you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear. And thank you, truly, for sticking with me through this journey. You're the heartbeat of this channel. Couldn't do it without you. See you in the next one.